Good morning, everybody. As John mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit today about the IRS's strategic focus areas specific to small exempt organizations' retirement plans. My name is Dave Villani. I'm a practice leader and partner here at AAF's Employee Benefit Plan Group.
And I'm Shawn Huxley, also a partner here at AAFCPAs Employee Benefit Plan Group.
Just a little bit about our practice area for those of you who aren't familiar. AAFCPAs audits over 180 plans annually, and we audit 401ks and 403bs for over 100 not-for-profit organizations. So we're very happy to give you guys a little bit of information and identify some areas that might be helpful to be prepared in the event of an IRS examination of your retirement plan. So each year, the IRS puts out a list of areas that they're going to focus on. And under that list of areas, they're specifically identified for small not-for-profit organizations, exempt organizations, where they want to target and data mine areas that might be red flags associated with their retirement plans. And so the IRS allocates their resources based on the areas of risk. They don't have unlimited resources, although they've expanded certainly their budget in the past year. They are focused on targeting specific areas each year so that they can have the best use of those high-risk issues. And again, they're primarily focused on compliance and looking at the programs, where they can identify inconsistencies by looking at your Form 990 and your Form 5500, which are both public information, and be able to identify if there's any areas where they should sort of take a peek under the hood. So the four areas that we're going to cover today, very specific to these areas that the IRS is focused on. Number one is small exempt organizations that sponsor retirement plans, the general compliance and requirements areas that they're looking at, and one participant 401k plans. For those of you that aren't familiar with those, you might have a small not-for-profit organization or even a for-profit organization. You only have one employee and you want to have a retirement benefit available for them. You can have what's called a one participant plan.
And I'll be speaking on worker classification, whether it's an employee versus a independent contractor, and then covering RMDs and when those are required to be made.
So for retirement plans for small exempt organizations, they're really honed in on three key areas. One is plan investments are properly being administered. They're looking at party and interest transactions, and they're looking at participant loans to see if they violated an IRC code, and that is that you've timely repaid your loan. You're making repayments on the loan timely. Within these three areas, the primary concern from the IRS is around fiduciary rules. So they want to make sure that you're administering the plan correctly. If you have issues with either prohibited transactions with related parties, if you aren't doing the things like evaluating your investment policy statement, having a record keeper that will help you with administration, they're really sort of kicking the tires on the concept of, are you doing all the things you're supposed to be doing for a retirement plan, regardless of the organization size or the plan size. When it comes to participant loans, again, the reminder is typically a participant can borrow from their 401k or 403b account, and they have to repay that loan over a specific amortization period. If you either terminate the employee or they go out on leave and they stop receiving a paycheck through the organization, they've likely stopped repaying their loan. And once that loan goes into default, you then have to make the decision, is that employee ever going to repay the loan? And if they are not, that typically results in what's called a deemed distribution, meaning that employee is now going to get a Form 1099-R and will have to pay tax like it were a distribution, and may result in early distribution penalties depending on their age. So again, IRS is focused on these three key areas and making sure that the plan is compliant. When it comes to one participant plans, again, very small organizations typically would have a one participant plan. There is some filing requirements associated with one participant plans. There's a form 5500 EZ, which is like a postcard filing. It's very basic. The IRS is looking to see if you have a small organization on your Form 990, did you contribute to a retirement plan? They then could data mine and look to see if a Form 5500 was filed, and could really sort of look into, are you meeting all the qualification requirements? And if you are not, to then possibly have an excise tax on excess contributions or failure to comply otherwise for a solo 401k plan. The other key piece on this is if you have a small organization that's grown, maybe at one point you only had one employee at a solo plan, now you may have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 employees, and are those employees now eligible for your retirement plan? They want to ensure that you haven't improperly excluded any employees from the plan.
And so the IRS's focus on worker classification is it's a very high risk area for organizations, especially nonprofits. And the reason for that is you're disclosing your 1099 counts on your Form 990 and also listing your top 5 independent contractors. And it's a focus point for a reason for the IRS. If a worker is misclassified as an independent contractor instead of an employee, there could be some significant financial impacts to that worker and also significant benefit for the organization. So when a worker is classified as an independent contractor instead of an employee, the organization could be reducing their tax burdens because they wouldn't have to focus on paying the workers FICA and any employer side taxes that they'd be responsible for because they would be an independent contractor. Then on the other side of things, the worker would now be getting a 1099 and they would, the tax burden would move to them. They would be increasing their taxes with self-employment tax. Now, in addition to, the tax side of things, typically independent contractors are excluded from an organization's benefits. So you're talking, healthcare, participating in retirement plans, things like that. So that's, again, a large cost savings for the organization because they wouldn't need to cover insurance expenses for the worker. And then if that organization has any type of plan, a pension plan, a 403B plan, a 401k plan, and there's employer match or employer contributions that are being made on the worker's behalf, if they're not allowed to be eligible for that plan because they're listed as an independent contractor, that worker loses out on those benefits. So that's why it's such a large focus for the IRS. So the big question is, how do you determine the proper classification of a worker? And the good thing is that the IRS gives us 3 categories to examine and some questions to ask when you're doing this. The first is related to behavioral control. So the question to ask is, does the organization control or have the right to control what the worker does and how the worker does the job? The second relates to financial control. So does the organization direct or control the financial and business aspects of the worker's job? Are the business aspects of the worker's job controlled by the payer? And then these are things that, how is the worker paid? How are their expenses reimbursed? Who's providing the tools and supplies relating to the job that they're performing? And then the third relates to the relationship of the parties. So are there written contracts or employee type benefits for the worker, like a pension plan, an insurance plan, vacation pay, things like that? Will the relationship continue, or is it a one-time situation and the work's just a one and done? And then is the work that's being performed by that worker a key aspect of the organization? So those are really the main questions you need to ask when performing an analysis of an employee versus an independent contractor when you're stuck in that situation and making that analysis. So we just had a quick poll for this. So would it be helpful to review your organization's policy for classifying employees with employees versus contractors with AAFCPAs? And the next area we were going to talk about is required minimum distributions, and those are for large benefit plans and all plans. So RMDs are required to begin on April 1st, following in the calendar year that the employee turns 70 and a half. If you're sticking with us for the Secure 2.0, you'll see that those ages are increasing, but for now we're looking at the 70 and a half. And then the reason that the IRS focuses on this is because if you fail to make these distributions timely, the plan could be disqualified itself. And then there could also be a 50% excise tax assessed on the amounts not distributed.
We did have a couple questions that came in. I'll try and address them now before we get to voluntary compliance, because they may be helpful as you've been listening through. And one is what is considered a small plan. Typically, the Department of Labor and the IRS consider a small plan to be any retirement plan that has less than 100 eligible participants. That's their technical definition of a small plan. And so if your organization has less than 100 participants, I guess you would presumably be on the target list. That's not to mean that large plans aren't also being examined. They certainly go through the same sort of scrutiny. But I think the focus from this component and what the IRS has published in 2023, they are certainly targeting the smaller plans. Other question was whether or not one participant plans also includes 403Bs in addition to 401Ks. Solo 401K is a very specific designation for a retirement plan. I don't believe a solo 403B exists, although you could have a 403B and only have one employee. But certainly, once you have multiple, they would also be eligible under the criteria outlined in the plan. So we talked a little bit about the 4 areas that the IRS is focused on and how they want to target their resources as it comes to noncompliance on small organizations' retirement plans. They also have options available for fixing or correcting when you have an error. So the key here is they have this component called a voluntary correction program, a VCP. And the key criteria here is you must not have received a notification from the IRS or the Department of Labor, basically notifying you of potential noncompliance or an examination. So once you've received the letter from the regulatory agency, you're no longer eligible. So the key here is to identify any noncompliance yourselves as organizations. And now you have the option to self-correct those noncompliance. And the IRS has given great details and information about how to correct those through self-correction programs and through this voluntary correction program. And so the benefit to filing under the voluntary correction program is that it limits your exposure on fees and penalties. For instance, if you have a 403B or a 401K plan, you know there's non-compliance that you need to fix. You know how to fix it. You want to make those corrections within the system. You then submit an application through the voluntary compliance program saying, these are the items we've identified as errors, how we've corrected them, and what we've done to make sure the participants are whole. And you submit that application along with a fee. The fee to submit a voluntary corrective program application is $1,500. And so you limit the exposure, you get that submitted, and they can't come after you for more fines, penalties, or excise taxes. And so this is a highly recommended approach if you know you've got non-compliance and you want to self-correct it to make sure they don't then come after you for fees, penalties, and excise taxes.
And just to note, we do 180 plans a year. We see issues all the time. The IRS, the DOL, they're not looking to drop the hammer on you. They want to work with you. They want to help you with your issues. So again, if things come up, that you haven't dealt with before or issues, we're here to help. Help you walk through this voluntary compliance situation. Again, coming forward and talking about your issues ahead of time is very helpful and eases your, working with the DOL.
Yeah, Shawn's exactly right. I mean, we've been through these items because we've audited so many plans. We know non-compliance happens. We've helped organizations to submit the VCP applications if they need it. We've given them guidance on how to self-correct. There's a lot of options available. Certainly putting your head in the sand is not the best option because they've made it so easy to self-correct. So we highly recommend you look into those areas. And if you need help or guidance, we're here to help you out. We've also provided a resource here in case anyone's interested in looking at what the areas that the IRS has put out there for their target on not-for-profit organizations. With that, if there's any other questions, we have a few seconds. If not, we'll try and catch up on those in the session later on today. All right, looks like we don't have any additional questions, so we'll see you all after the break. Thank you.
Thank you.